Recently, I've been reading a lot more because I just finished my SSM study break. Basically, when you're in your fourth year of medical school, you have 4 weeks of study break twice in the year. And my study break just passed in October, and instead of spending it doing a lot of studying, I decided to really get back into reading. This video is just an excuse for me to ramble on about all the books that I've read lately, what I liked and what I didn't like, so if you're looking for study tips, this is not for you. But without further ado, the first book I read was Fourth Wing. So Fourth Wing is a fantasy romance book. It's more of a romance book than it is fantasy, and it follows our main character named Violet, who's enrolled in a war academy. So Violet is originally supposed to be a scribe. She really likes books and really likes reading, but because her mom is like the commander general of the war academy, her mom forces her to enroll in the riders quadrant. And what riders do is that they ride dragons. So she ultimately ends up getting into the riders quadrant after passing the first test. And the book starts off from there. She's trying to walk across like a parapet and she like nearly dies. So from the very beginning, like it's quite fast paced. And that was one of the things I liked about this book. It really kept me reading. I liked the plot. And it was a really easy read. So like you just felt like you just couldn't stop. You just kept on going. Okay. So after Violet gets into the Riders Quadrant, she meets a group of friends in Fourth Wing. That's her wing. And that's hence the title of the book. And of course, this is a fantasy romance book. So there's always a male lead. And this is kind of the part that I didn't like so much. So she meets the male lead within the first, if not second chapter. He's a couple years older than her, and he's a wing leader. He's in charge of another wing. It turns out that Violet's mom was one of the people who helped kill the male lead, Zayden's dad. Because Zayden's dad was leading a rebellion, like revolution, and her mom being the commander, the general, she was helping put down this rebellion. So from the very beginning, Violet was warned by her older sister, who's already graduated from the War Academy. Her older sister Mira's like, Violet, stay away from Zayden. He's like, danger, okay? Everything about him screams danger. So she meets him on the first day, and Lord Behold, she thinks he's super hot. And I would say around 40, if not 50% of the book is about the girl just obsessing about how good the guy looks. Like every time he walks into the room, her scalp just like tingles. The amount of times I've read the word tingle in this book is absolutely insane. So let's first talk about the things that I did like about this book. Number one, there's dragons. And after reading this book, I was like, oh my god, I really like fantasy books with dragons. Because in this book, the riders are paired up with dragons, and the dragons pick the humans. And if you're not picked, then you kind of stay behind an extra year. And along the process of trying to get a dragon to pick you, there's like a very, very high chance of you getting scorched to death, because these dragons have kind of bad tempers. And I really liked the dragons in this book, because one of the dragons that Violet bonds is like the super ancient, grumpy dragon that's like, the stuff he says is like, it's just like really grumpy and like really arrogant, but it's also just really funny. So after reading this book, I'm definitely gonna be on the lookout for more fantasy books with dragons. So another thing I liked about this book, and I kind of briefly mentioned this, was that it was a total page turner. Like, you could fly through the book, partly because the writing wasn't absolutely amazing, but it was like easy to read. The plot was interesting enough for me, at least, for me to just keep going. I was just like reading and reading, and I just read this on my Kindle. So like, I didn't even realize how thick the book was until I saw the physical books in like other people's videos. And that's when I realized like, oh my god, this book is actually really thick. But I was just reading it on my Kindle and I flew through it super quickly. Because the plot is engaging for me. It's really action-packed, and sometimes I felt that like this is kind of a drawback for me, at least, is that the girl would go through like a series of events, but she wouldn't have like some time afterwards to kind of think and process. It would just like this event and then jumps to the next event. And then 3 months later jumps to this event. So it's like back to back to back to back. So if you like something that's really fast-paced and action-packed for the most part, then I would recommend Fourth Way. And if you like dragons. The last thing I liked about this book was actually the characterization. I actually liked how Violet was written to be a character that had some flaws and some weaknesses. So she's got really weak joints and ligaments, and she's like constantly dislocating her shoulder or her elbow, which actually like medically that does not make sense. Like how can she like strap her shoulder and just keep on pushing through the pain? She keeps on talking about how she has super high pain tolerance because she's sprained or dislocated her elbow or her wrist or her shoulder like multiple times. But like suspension of disbelief, okay, it's okay. But I like how Violet has these weaknesses that holds her back, and she kind of finds ways to overcome it by improvising and by looking for another way out. And she plays on her strengths, and this is something that the people around her kind of teach her. Xaden kind of teaches her, like, one of your best advantages is that you're so fast with knives. So she's really good at throwing knives, and her aim is really accurate, which I think is, like, really cool. Because it would be totally amazing to be able to, like, throw knives and have, like, perfect aim. So, that being said, there were a couple of things I did not really like about this book. This book has the enemies to lovers trope, and I honestly didn't think it was done so well. The enemies is because Violet's mom killed Xaden's father because his father was leading a rebellion, okay? So from the get-go, she's warned by everyone, basically, that Xaden is, like, a bad person. You need to stay away from him. And on the first time that she sees him, she's, like, instantly attracted to him, okay? So, I mean, okay, it's okay if you have, like, some lust, like, your hormones are raging, whatever, right? But it gets a bit too much if every single time Xaden shows up in the book, and then there's, like, 2 or 3 lines, and it's, like, Violet talking about how attractive or how handsome he is. And if I have to read one more description about how he's, like, tall, handsome, and, like, his jawline, and, like, his scar, or, like, I just can't. Just can't. What else? I made some notes about the stuff I didn't like about this book. Let me see. Yeah, especially during, like, the middle of the book. So Xaden's really good at fighting, and he decides to help train Violet because she needs to win battles in order to stay alive in this war academy, okay? So they're, like, practicing hand-to-hand combat in, like, the fighting room, and, like, they're getting, like, super close to each other because it's hand-to-hand combat, and, like, you get the idea. It's, like, gonna be some, like, intimate, like, it's, like, high tension. It's, like, she's, like, attracted to him, and, like, they're really close to each other, and they're up in each other's personal space. But, like, Violet, please pull yourself together. Like, stop there staying over him, especially because, like, she's still, like, denying her feelings, but she's, like, constantly conflicted about being attracted to him, and it just wasn't for me. Something else I didn't really like about their relationship was how Violet tends to pick arguments over seemingly inconsequential stuff. Or not necessarily inconsequential, but stuff that I feel like Xaden actually does quite reasonably. Like, I see where Xaden is coming from, and I see how he has a very valid point for doing what he did. And if I were Violet, I would understand it instead of picking a big fight about it. I'm not going to spoil too much about the book, but basically, Violet gets angry about Xaden having these secrets, but I think from, like, a reader's point of view, like, you can see that Xaden has really valid reasons for keeping these secrets, because Violet's friend can read minds, and because Violet doesn't know how to shield her mind from other people from reading her mind, and, like, here I'm thinking about, like, when Harry Potter is trying to learn how to shield his mind from memories so that he's not, like, impacted by Voldemort's thoughts. But yeah, that's a side note, okay? But it kind of reminded me of that. But anyways, Xaden will have these secrets, and Violet gets, like, super angry. And even towards the end of the book, Violet is, like, really angry because, oh, you're hiding these secrets from me. You're not trusting me. And just, like, it actually really makes a lot of sense. Like, it's very valid that he's doing this. So in some senses, I felt like Violet was a bit irrational about some things. And yes. So the book ended up at like a little cliffhanger. And by the time I like finished reading some other books, the second book had come out. And even though there are some things I did not like about the relationship, the fact that it had dragons in there just like was really attractive for me. So I decided to pick up the second book, which was Iron Flame. So Iron Flame picks up directly where Fourth Wing ends. Violet was out on a mission with Xaden and with some of the other people in her wing, and eventually she returns back to the War Academy. But everyone thinks she died. And basically she's like, no, I'm alive. They show up and they graduate. And now they're second years. And now Violet is 1 year older and she's watching the incoming first years come in. And one of her best friends, younger sister, is in the incoming years, so she tries to look out for her. Book 2 in general focuses a lot more on Violet's relationships, whether it be her relationships with Xaden or her relationships with her friend, like Rihanna. I think it's Ree, of her relationships with Ree and just everyone else in her wing. Because she's kind of now in on the secret that Xaden was hiding from her, she tries to kind of alienate her other friends or just kind of like keep some distance, and she starts to drift away from her friends because there's a lot of things that she doesn't want to tell them because it would endanger them, which is exactly why Xaden didn't tell her in book 1, but she got really angry about it. Okay, so that is the aspect about her relationship with her friends. In terms of her relationship with Xaden, they're still constantly arguing because she's like, in this relationship, I need 100% trust or it's going to be nothing. And she refuses to like, be like intimate with him. And I admire her for like setting these standards for her relationship. Like she knows what she wants. She knows that she wants 100% disclosure. And she wants that 100% disclosure because to her, it means that you're trusting me. If you're not telling me everything, then that means that you're not trusting me. And she won't move forward in a relationship until she fully knows everything about Xaden. So this was one of the things I liked. I really liked Fourth Wing for the action, but I kind of also liked Iron Flame because it didn't have that much action. It focused more on the relationship. And I also think that this is one of my first fantasy romance books where I'm actively rooting for a guy rather than the girl. Usually in fantasy romance books that I read, I'm like, the guys just, they all kind of look the same. Like, they're tall, they're handsome, they're constantly, like, lifting an eyebrow or, like, smirking or something like that. But in this book, I actually was rooting for Xaden a lot more than I was rooting for Violet because I felt that some of the things that Violet really focused on, kind of, the way that she said a lot of things felt very immature. Like, in the book, she's 20 years old, but some of the arguments she picks, and she's, like, constantly nagging and, like, upset about that thing, whereas I feel like the fact that Xaden isn't 100% disclosing everything to you is very valid, because in their second year, they actually go through training that teaches people to withstand torture. And they teach you to withstand torture by just, like, putting you through torture. And whoever breaks, well, like, you break. And if you make it, then, like, good job, you made it, okay? But a lot of stuff is held back from Violet because she's in a very tricky situation. She still doesn't know how to shield her mind fully. She's gonna be put under torture in year 2 as practice, as training. So, and there's just a lot of things that if you told Violet, she would be in danger. But she doesn't really get this, and she's constantly picking these arguments. And I appreciate the author's intent for writing about, like, fleshing out the relationship between Violet and Xaden so that it wasn't just purely physical attraction. There were some intricacies where Violet couldn't move forwards until she felt that they were on the same page. And it was about setting boundaries and having, like, ground rules, which that part of the relationship and that part of just the entire book 2, I did appreciate. Something else I also really liked about this book was how Xaden was really focused on communication. there were so many times in this book where they were arguing, and Xaden was also like, Violet, talk to me about this. And man, I just really appreciate a book where there are just some like random misunderstandings because of poor communication. Like, there is like some tension and some anger between Violet and Xaden, but Xaden makes an active effort to communicate, and I loved how he did that. And I was totally rooting for the guy more than I was rooting for the girl. And lastly, dragons. I still love the dragons in this book. In this book, one of Violet's dragons is now like a teenager, okay? And she's just like going through like dragon puberty. And the way the ancient dragons kind of just talk about the teenager dragon, like, oh, she's just like going through her phase. It's really cute, and it's like really endearing. And I find that moving forward in fantasy books, I think I prefer dragons over like other mythical things like vampires, which brings me to actually no. I need to talk about the things I did like about this book too. And then we'll talk about vampires, because that was the book I had read afterwards. Yes, I have a lot of things I did like about this book. Number one, kind of many descriptions about how various different body parts of the guy looked, moved, or just in general existed. The number of times where I read about the guy like lifting an eyebrow, or like smurfing, or just like the corner of his lips like twitches, or like too many description. They'll be like in the middle of an argument, like Xaden and Violet will be arguing, and then like Violet just can't help noticing like how toned his body is, and they're just like, I'm not more mad at him. Like could you be more like? I'm at a loss for words. Okay, just I would appreciate it a lot more. I would like this book a lot more if like the author just like toned down the amount of descriptions of the guys in this book. It was like bad in book 1, but it was like worse in book 2. Okay. And I realized that because I've been reading so many of these like character description, body description stuff, my eyes just kind of skip, like from quotation marks to quotation marks. So I'll be reading dialogue and then I'll see the end quotation mark, and usually it'll end with like he smirked. Instead of saying he said, it'll be like he and insert some other word that isn't the word said. So usually my eyes will just skip that part and then skip to the next dialogue, quotation mark, and I'll just keep reading. And I've been trying to force myself to slow down a bit more, but I feel like it's honestly not my fault, because a lot of the books I've been reading has these kind of fancy and like embellishments I really just don't like. And yeah, that's probably why I read so quickly, because I skip half of the book that has too many character descriptions because I'm just cringing too much, and I want to just save my eyes from that. Okay. Oh yeah, something else is that I realized a lot of guys in fantasy romance books seem to have all the same character descriptions. Like, they're all tall, they're all handsome, they all usually have dark hair, they all usually have some really cool scar, and then there's always some note about the guy's jawline. And I actually went online and looked up character fan art for like Ryzan, which is the main guy in ACOTAR. I looked up some fan art of Xaden. I looked up some fan art of the guy from Throne of Glass. I don't know his name because I actually never finished the series. But that's something else. Yeah, and basically all the guys just look the same. They all have the same character descriptions, and like at that point I just gave up while like trying to imagine what the world looks like, okay? And it got to a point where it became a kind of a source of entertainment for me to just notice how many times Xaden's body was mentioned. Like, I just read it and I'm just like, and it's like funny for the wrong reasons, but it was just really entertaining to see how many different ways his body could be described. And then once it starts getting repetitive, I'm just like, we're so done with it, okay? Like, I appreciate Xaden for his character, but I don't appreciate, like, I just couldn't appreciate him anymore for his looks because it was just too overdone. Okay, now that I'm done ranting about Xaden, let me rant a bit about Violet. So, I don't understand how her mind works. As in, I really couldn't emphasize with Violet very well in this book. I emphasized more with I had more empathy for Xaden than I did for Violet, because the author would create this environment, or like basically the stakes were very high. Okay, like the stakes are very high. They were in a very dangerous situation, and like all around them there was like this huge emphasis on like, oh my god, everything we're doing is like super dangerous, so we have to be really quiet about it, and we have to be sneaky about it, and we just have to be very, very careful. And then Violet over there is talking about how she has to be really careful, and she doesn't seem to be very careful. Like, she doesn't act that way. There's one part where they're stealing like a journal, and Violet's just like, so they steal a journal with Xaden, and then Xaden's like flying off, and Violet's just there like standing there just like watching her boyfriend fly off when she's got like another secret journal that she's not supposed to have with her. And just like, girl, what are you doing? Like, please run to your room, put that journal in that safe place, because if you're gonna get caught, consequences, man. And there's another part where like they're trying to figure out a secret for how to reactivate a ward stone to raise the wards to protect where they're living at. And Violet figures out the secret, but she doesn't tell anyone, you know? And like, having these wards up are really, really important. Like, they're at the verge of war. They're about to get attacked by their enemy in like the very close imminent future. But she's like, nah, I'm just gonna keep it to myself. And like, I want to wait till Xaden comes back so I can discuss with him, okay? So that kind of makes sense, okay? So she waits a week, and then Xaden comes back, and then she tells him. And then she's like, yeah, but let's deal with this later. I have a field trip. Like, I have this mission that I have to do for school. And because activation of this ward stone needs my dragon, but I need my dragon for the school mission, like assignment, for the school assignment, basically, where they go on like a field trip or like a kind of mission, right? So she's like, because I need my dragon with me, and activating the ward stone also needs my dragon, but I prioritize going on this mission higher than raising wards that would protect the place that we're living at and protect them from the enemy that's about to come attack them because they're at war. So she just goes off with her dragon to like go on her class assignment mission. I'm just like, you're training on this field trip mission thing to prepare for war. Like, you're doing this practice to prepare for war. But having the war stone activated would be so much more beneficial than you just having extra practice about going to war. Like, where are your priorities? Please. I was just like, oh my, and you can see that things happening, and you can just kind of see things happening. And it's like, it's cliche and it's predictable, but there's some parts where like, you feel like the girl's IQ kind of just dropped. And you're like, what? I thought female leads were supposed to be like the really smart, bright, like innovative, you know? And Violet is that, you know? But there are some parts where there's just like little blips in her intelligence I really, really question. Okay. So when I finished book 2, I was like, I'm not gonna read the third book when it comes out next year. I just can't. But then I think about it, I still kind of like the book. I still like I want to see how the relationship plays out, and I want to see how Violet's character arc will develop. Hopefully she will develop. I want to see how that progresses, and I want to see how they go. So as for now, as of November 2023, I am likely going to read the third book when it comes out, unless I discover another fantasy book with dragons and romance I like even more. Overall, I gave Fourth Wing a 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave Iron Flame a 3 out of 5 stars. So in retrospect, both books were probably a 3.5 out of 5, because I genuinely enjoyed myself when I was reading. And after reading like Fourth Wing, it really got me into reading other books, but there were some things that were also really problematic. And I feel like some of the things the author did do intentionally. Like, I think Rebecca Yarros, the author of this book, I think she intentionally wrote Violet to pick these arguments that maybe I felt when I was reading that sounded quite immature, but I think it was intentional. And like, in a sense, she was successful in that. But those are things that I did not really like. I feel like it could have been done better. But that's that. And moving on to my next book. The next book I read after Fourth Wing was The Serpent, and so I can never remember the name of this book. It's like I refer to it in my mind as just the Serpent book. Okay. It's called The Serpent and the Wings of Night. So this was another super popular book on like Book Talk, on BookTube. And this time it's not about dragons, it's about vampires. Okay. So there's a healing girl, and she decides to enroll in a tournament. And this kind of tournament is like the Hunger Games, but for vampires, okay? Anyone and everyone can enroll in this tournament, and if they emerge and survive the tournament, they get to have one wish granted by the goddess, okay? So this healing girl decides to also enroll in this tournament because she's actually like the adopted daughter of one of the vampire like kings, in a sense, like one of the vampire rulers, like and she wants, it's not really revealed in like the beginning part of the book, but she wants to have one of her wishes fulfilled by the goddess. She decides to enroll in this vampire tournament, even though she's a human. So this book is a fantasy romance book. It's also got a bit of enemies to lovers in it. And when she enrolls in the tournament, she forms a partnership with some other vampires. And one of the vampires that she forms this partnership with is the male love interest, okay? And I don't remember any of the characters' names because I have this issue where when I'm reading books too quickly, it just kind of like, the plot kind of blurs. Like the fact that I still remember the plot is actually kind of amazing because I think I read this book back in like early October and now it's like the end of November. But here, let me check. Yeah, I don't remember what the girl's name is. I'm sorry. You can probably find it on Goodreads. But I mean, just like a couple of notes about my general impression because it's already kind of foggy. I remember not liking this book as much as Fourth Wing. But in general, my impression was that this book was also a really fast-paced book. I read it really quickly, and again, if you like action, and if you don't like something that's slow, you want something that's fantasy romance, and you like vampires, then you might like this book. It reads very easily. Like, it reads a bit like, I heard one person describe it as, it reads like fan fiction. And that's partly why I finished the book so quickly and also forgot about it so quickly. Because my brain probably didn't have enough time to store it in my long-term memory. And then I was just like on to the next. I also realized after reading this book, I like dragons more than vampires. And this book focused more on vampires. But the general kind of tropes are still in this book. Like, it's like the girl, she's like kind of like the underdog. She's got her weaknesses, but she finds ways to survive and adapt and use her strengths to her advantage. In general, I would describe this book as like Hunger Games, enemies to lovers, plus vampires. And I gave this book a 3 out of 5, so I liked Fourth Wing more, but yeah, maybe check out this book if you like vampires. I've been filming for like 40-something minutes, and I need to cook lunch because it's currently like 1:52. But I'll be back after lunch. Okay, I'm back. Finished eating lunch. And moving on, the next book I read was Divine Rivals. So this book is about 2 people who work as reporters at a newspaper. They're kind of enemies, but they also inadvertently start becoming pen pals because the girl has a typewriter where she writes letters that originally she was planning to write for her brother. And she sends it through like a magical wardrobe in her room. And the person on the receiving side is not her brother. It's her rival that is at the newspaper. So the setting of Divine Rivals, they're in the midst of a war that are happening between 2 gods. And there are soldiers that are enlisting for the different gods that are fighting in the war. And the main character's brother is one of the people who decided to enlist in the war. So she really misses her brother, and she writes letters to him. But it turns out that the letters are going to someone else, and from there on, they kind of start like a pen-pal relationship. So first, the things I liked about this book. I could really see how these characters were wrangling with their feelings during this time of war. And I could really understand how it's sometimes easier for you to open up about how you're feeling when you're writing a letter, because there's a space and there's a distance that you can create, and it makes it feel less personal. Even though it sounds super bizarre to be sending letters through like a magical wardrobe to someone else you don't know. But I did enjoy the writing and how like they're sending each other letters, and I liked that idea. That being said, this was not a book that really pulled me in. Like, I didn't feel a super strong connection to either the guy or the girl in the book. So it was like, it was a nice book to read, but I wasn't super invested in it. And I don't, at this point, at least, I don't like it enough to read the second book, because I know the second book did come out this year, but I'm just not that into it. I feel like I'm also not too attached to the characters, because I read this book in a time where I was like basically running away from my problems. I had like a bunch of lectures that I needed to clear, but I didn't really want to. So I was reading this book instead, and I was reading really quickly, and I didn't really take that much time to process the book. Again, this happened a bit with the Serpent book, and it happened with the Irregulars. So maybe if I reread the book in another point in time when I was actually feeling more receptive to the ideas in the book and just more relaxed, I might have enjoyed the book more. But as of now, I don't plan on reading the second book. And overall, I gave this book, I think, a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read after Divine Rivals was also a super short, it was a quick read for me at least, and it was Poison Study. So I've actually heard about this book a long time ago, and I got it on my Kindle. Back then I got it on my Nook. And back then I got it, but I never actually got around to reading it, but I finally got around to it now. And it's quite nice. I like the premise. It's about a girl named Yelena, and because she's about to get executed, she has one chance to instead survive and become the food taster for, I think it's the commander? Like, it's not the king, I think it's the commander of the country. And she's got a bit of Katniss inside her from, like, the Hunger Games, because she can climb trees and she can evade capture, and there's a very light sense of magic in there. There's, like, a bit of magic. It's not very, like, fantasy magic. It's a bit in there, okay? And she has that, too. And I also liked the premise of the book and how, like, it portrays a female protagonist overcoming her trauma. Like, the reason why she was imprisoned is for killing I think it was a duke's son, and she did it for some reasons that are later explained. And the book kind of has a character arc where Yelena is like overcoming her trauma slowly and slowly without having it mentioned in like every other page of the book. Like, it's not like in your face, but you can kind of see the dynamic between Yelena and Valak, which is, I think, the spy master, or he's like in charge of training the food taster, basically. The dynamic between them is pretty cute. There's like some romantic tension, and in general, this was I think it's a YA book, and I find that I kind of prefer the amount of romance there is in YA books, and I prefer like the plot, the adventure of adult fiction or fantasy. But yeah, this book was also one of the books I read super quickly, so some of the plot is kind of muddled. I did remember that the ending of the book felt very rushed. Like, there were some things that kind of just, it felt like the author word vomited all her like ideas, and basically all the series of events just got packed into like the last couple of chapters. Everything just went by really quickly, and I'm pretty sure it's not because I read too quickly. I think it was just compressed. Yeah, so I felt like the ending could have been done better. But in general, it was a nice book, and I also gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was actually a reread, and it was 2 books, The Queen of Attolia and The King of Attolia. And these 2 books are the second and the third book in the Queen's Thief series. And talking about what the second book is about, or what the third book is about, would like spoil the entire series. So I'll just like give you a little blurb about what The Thief is about, which is the very first book of the series. So The Thief is about a thief called Jen, and he is plucked from the royal prisons by the Magnus, which is the Magnus is the teacher of, I think it's the nephew of the king of Sunis. And he's basically like the royal scholar. And basically, this Magnus thinks that he knows the location of an ancient gift, and he needs someone to steal it for him. And Jen is always bragging about how he can steal anything. So he decides to get Jen out of the royal prisons, and then they kind of just go on an adventure. Along the way, there's a lot of like storytelling, and they talk about like the various myths in the story. And it's very, very similar to The False Prince. I swear the author of The False Prince read The Thief before writing her book, because it's just so uncannily similar. In general though, if you like The False Prince, you will most likely like The Thief. And I just really, really love the main character. Jen is probably like one of the top like book boyfriends because he's just so amazing. He's really clever, and I love the writing of the book where the author shows how Jen is really clever without explicitly saying like, oh, he was so clever. There will be things where like he plans or he plots and he schemes, and then as the reader you realize that he was behind this after the fact, and you're like, oh my god, that was so smart. So I love how Jen is written, and there's just so many moments like this, even throughout the second book and the third book, where it's a prime example of like, show me, don't tell me. The author really shows you how intelligent and how witty and how pure Jen is. Jen is very good at scheming and like devising these plots, but at the same time, he's a very pure person. Like his raw emotions when he shows them, it really hits you. I recommend the Queen's Thief series to like almost everyone. It's a great series. It's got like a good balance of scheming. It's a good amount of plot, and I just love the characters. I love all the characters. So that was The Queen of Attolia and The King of Attolia. Those were the two books I reread. And the next book that I read afterwards was All Roads Lead Here. So I was kind of reading these two books simultaneously, and All Roads Lead Here is not a fantasy book. I was kind of reading way too much fantasy plus minus romance, so I decided to try a bit of slow burn rom-com. So All Roads Lead Here is by Mariana Zapata, and she is known for writing a lot of rom-coms that usually revolve around some kind of sport. And this time the sport in question is hiking. This book follows the main character. I think her name was Aurora. She recently got divorced and she's moving back to her hometown to kind of just like rediscover herself. And I really liked the whole character arc of how she kind of rebuilds herself and she heals herself by doing really mundane things per se, and just building a life for herself again. All Roads Lead Here is a very mild, it's a very chill, small town, really cute. And in this book, she was going on hikes because when she was a child, she lost her mom when her mom went missing after going hiking by herself. And she decides to go back to her hometown and kind of reconnect with her mom by going on the hikes that her mom used to love going on. So that's our main character. And enter the male lead, who is Rhodes. And he is the landlord of the little garage apartment that's separated from the main house. So Mr. Rhodes and his son lives in the main house, and then she rented out the place above the garage. He is I think, a park ranger or forest wildlife kind of thing. And she's not instantly attracted to him. There is some attraction, but she doesn't swoon from the very beginning, which I appreciated. But there are still too many mentions about how he was tall and like really handsome. But I'll let that pass. I think this was at least more bearable than like 440. Okay. So yeah, let's start with the things that I did like. Number one, there were parts in the book where the character gets herself into an icky situation, but she manages to kind of save herself. She doesn't need a guy to come in to save herself. Like, there will be some points when you're reading and you expect the guy to kind of show up and solve her problems, but she solves her problems herself, which is refreshing for a rom-com book. And leading into that, I liked how the book focused more on Aurora's character development and her character arc rather than the romance between her and Mr. Rhodes. It focuses more on how she's beginning to really put herself first, and there's one scene towards the really end of the book where she confronts her ex-mother-in-law, and it was so enjoyable reading the passage where she really gets all her thoughts out and tells her that the way you treated me was not okay. And that's why she decided to leave and she's not going back. In general, this was a slow burn romance, but it was a romance book where the romance wasn't overwhelming. There was the physical attraction between them, but the underlying theme in this book was how Aurora was getting to learn that love could be unconditional. And in her previous relationship, the love that she received was often conditional on how she gave, and everything she gave and everything she just kept on giving and giving and giving. But moving forward, she begins to learn that love can be unconditional. And it's not just the love she develops with Rhodes, but it's also the love with one of her best friends from childhood. And in various different situations, she's reminded again and again that love can be unconditional. And I really liked how the book talked about this instead of just focusing on physical attraction, that stuff. In general, I really liked Aurora as a character because she starts off as a people pleaser, but throughout the story, her character develops to where she knows to set boundaries for herself and she really stands up for herself. And something else is that she's not those type of female protagonists who instantly excels at whatever she's doing. There are situations in the very beginning where she's really struggling to adapt because she decides to help out her best friend's store by selling camping gear and fishing gear, and she's completely lost about what the different fishing lines do and stuff, and she's struggling that, and you see her struggling. She doesn't feeling so clueless, so she really works on that. In terms of the downsides of the book, number one, I didn't like the too many physical descriptions of the guy. I think I've said that again and again in this video, so I'm not gonna beat a dead bush, but just know that it will be there. And I think it's always there in rom-coms. You just kind of learn to overlook it. And I guess another downside, but it's also kind of expected, is that this is the classic rom-com trope. So they get together and then it's all cute and loving and everything, and then guy finds out a secret about the girl, and then there's a misunderstanding because of miscommunication, but it resolves really quickly too. And I liked that they didn't dwell too much on it. He was angry, but the whole point was that he loved her regardless of her past. And overall, this was a cute, cozy rom-com, small town vibes, kind of made me want to go on a hike after reading the book. Yeah, the second and last book I read was Check and Mate. So Check and Mate was also released on November 7th, the same day as Iron Flame. And after I finished reading Iron Flame, I decided to read Check and Mate, and it's written by Ali Hazelwood. So if you read any of Ali Hazelwood's books, this book follows the similar kind of format, but I think this was also a YA book. So expect less explicit scenes, the explicitness is toned down a lot. And it was also a really funny book. So Check and Mate, as the title is already hinting at, is about chess. It's about a girl named Mallory, and she gets dragged to a chess tournament by her friend for a charity event. So Mallory previously was a really good chess player, but because of some event that is involving her father, she decided to quit chess. And now she's about to graduate high school, but she chooses to not go to college because she needs to keep on working and making money to support her family. Her mom was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and it's really debilitating at some days. Her mom's income is very unstable, so Mallory works a lot so she can pay the bills for her mom's medication, plus the bills to put food on the table, and to pay for extracurricular activities that her two younger sisters really enjoys. During the chess tournament that Mallory gets dragged to by her friend, she plays against a chess master. He's ranked number 1, and his name is Nolan. And she beats him in chess. Okay, so from there on, she gets all this attention, and one grandmaster seeks her out, and she's like, I want to train you to play in tournaments, and I'll pay you for it. And if you win these tournaments, there will also be cash prizes. And basically, it's a better way for her to make money in comparison to repairing cars. She decides to take on this job, and she tells herself going in that chess is only going to be for work. I'm only playing chess for the money, and outside of work, I'm not going to, fall into the black hole of obsessing over chess games and, dissecting different positions. She says, this will just be work, and it will be separated from my life. But we all know that when the main character says that, that never ends up happening. So she rediscovers her interest in chess, and along the way, she has multiple war encounters with Nolan, who is, as you can probably guess, the male love interest. And yes, that's that. So I really liked this book. Number one, this book made me cry. And any book that makes me cry automatically deserves a 4 out of 5. And the scene that made me cry was one part where Valerie just loses her temper because her family doesn't appreciate her for everything that she does to put food on the table, and her family just kind of makes fun of the food that she cooks and how it tastes bad. And she just loses her temper because she feels so unappreciated. And I could just really understand where the character is coming from. And after that outbreak, she has a conversation with her mom that explains and clears up a lot of things about her trauma, in a sense, about chess. And that chapter, that section was just really hit me hard. Besides that, I also really liked the humor in the book. Allie Hazelwood has her style of humor, and it's really a hit or miss for some people. And for me, it was a hit, because there were some parts where I was reading and I was just laughing out loud. There was one dinner scene where her 2 younger siblings, they basically talked like little adults, and they were talking about Mallory's sexual orientation when Nolan was over for coming over for dinner, and it was just really funny. I was reading and I was laughing out loud. And I remember laughing out loud when I was reading Love Theoretically and Love Hypothesis, which were both by Allie Hazelwood. So if you liked her previous 2 books, you'll likely like Check and Mate. And even if you didn't like her previous book, I do recommend that you give Check and Mate a try, because it's slightly different from her previous books. And number one, her audience is already different. It's YA. So there's a lot of pop culture references, which was something that got a bit too much for me. There was references to Zendaya and to BTS. There was a lot of random pop culture references. It wasn't a turn off for me, but it was a bit too much for me. I also enjoyed how the book didn't overly obsess over how body parts of the guys looked. I think it was mentioned that he was tall maybe twice. The book focused more on the characters' feelings, how Mallory is sacrificing so much for the family. She puts everyone first. She doesn't put herself first. And she traps all her feelings into a little small box inside her. All her desires, all her wants, she kind of traps it inside her. Towards the second half of the book, she learns to put herself first and really enjoy the things that she enjoys without feeling guilty about it. Things I didn't like how inconsiderate her younger sisters were. It got to a point where it didn't really make that much logical sense, because imagine that you're in a family where your older sister is working super hard to pay the bills. Your mom has rheumatoid arthritis. She doesn't exactly have a stable source of income, and yet you're being super ungrateful about how your older sister is working hard to make money for you to attend these extracurricular activities. That is basically what's happening with Mallory's younger siblings. It just didn't sit that well with me, and it didn't feel too logical how her younger siblings were so inconsiderate of what Mallory was doing, despite the financial situation of the family. But besides that, I really like this book. Cute rom-com, minimum descriptions about how hot the guy is, focused more on the girl and her relationship with Trust and her relationship with her family, and also just her relationship with herself. So I would recommend this book. That being said, this is an Allie Hazelwood book, so expect all the tropes that she usually uses in her rom-coms, but I felt like they were done well for the most part. I liked the ending. It was it's very nice and cozy and warm. And speaking of cozy, this brings me to my next book, which is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. So this was a very cozy, it's like fall vibes. It's a book that you can kind of like curl up in your bed and just read, and it's really wholesome. It's a very cute book. I think the word that kept on coming back to me time and time again is cute. The characters were cute. The setting was like a small town. It was very cute in general. It was set in Britain, I think. And basically it follows our main character, who's a witch. Her name is Mika. And in this like setting, witches are not allowed to spend too much time together because it can be dangerous and it can cause like sudden burst and uncontrolled uses of magic. So witches only meet up every Thursday, I want to say, of every 3 months. Basically, they meet once every 3 months. And Mika she loves magic. She loves doing magic. And she wants to have someone to share her love with, in a sense. But there's no one around her that are witches because they're not supposed to meet unless it's like every third month. And she kind of lacks this kind of connection. So what she does is she posts videos online of her doing like witchy stuff, magical stuff. And most people don't think it's actually magic. They think it's just special effects. But one day she receives like a letter that is seeking to employ her as a teacher for 3 young witches. So eventually Mika accepts, and from here it's like the classic found family trope. So if you really like found family, you will really likely enjoy The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. She goes to this small town. It's not even like small town. It's like in the middle of nowhere. I think the place is called... It's called Nowhere House. Yes, it's called Nowhere House. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. And she meets 3 young witches that are children, and she tries to teach them magic. And there's also like this really broody librarian along with a housekeeper, I think, and 2 other like caretakers for the 3 young children of Nowhere House. And she kind of develops a romantic relationship with this broody librarian. And you can kind of tell that he's the male love interest. But I just really couldn't connect, in a sense, with the main character. It just didn't work for me. I know it works for a lot of people, and it might work for you. So if you like witches, and if you like stuff that's really cute and cozy, I do recommend this book. So the things I liked about this book, I really liked Mika's characterization. She's constantly looking for a sense of belongingness in this book. And even though Mika is like the personification of sunshine, like she's constantly like smiling. She smiles like she's like the sun. But she still has her gray days, and it's really nurturing for her to have found her family in Nowhere House and kind of be okay with being unhappy, but also learn that there are other people out there that will be accepting of who she is and who loves her. My favorite part of this book was how it talked about the difference between being nice and being kind. And I'll quote this from the book. So this is Mika talking to the librarian and the caretakers. Like, it's just a bunch of adults having this conversation. And Mika says, "I don't pretend to know much about people. But one thing I've noticed over the years is that some people are nice and some people are kind. Lillian is the parent of the 3 children. Lillian sounds like she's more nice than she is kind. Does that make sense? Niceness is good manners and stopping to give someone directions and smiling at the overworked cashier at the supermarket. These are all good things, but they have nothing to do with what's underneath. Niceness is all about what we do when people are looking. Kindness, on the other hand, runs deep. Kindness is what happens when no one is looking." The theme about the difference between niceness and kindness is kind of woven throughout the book, and I really enjoyed the passages that talked about this and talked about how in some places the characters were nice, whereas in Other places the characters were kind. And it makes me question how some of the things I do, is it because I'm just being nice, or is it because I'm a kind person? So yeah, that's just some food for thought. Some things to look out for in this book is that it's not very action-driven. It's generally slow paced. So if you're looking for something that's more action-packed, maybe this book isn't for you. Additionally, the plot is kind of predictable. Like, it really just works out in the end. It's like, you see it coming, but it was enjoyable. It was a nice read. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. And that completes all the books I read during my study break. Instead of studying, I think I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I read 10 books. And was this the best use of my time? Maybe not, but I really had a fun time. I am really enjoying getting back into reading, and I also realized some things about myself in terms of reading. I found that I read way too fast, and sometimes I don't take the time to process what's happening in the books. And sometimes with, especially fantasy books, there's a lot of words that are spent describing the setting or describing the little details. And oftentimes, I tend to focus too much on dialogue, and I'm learning and trying to slow down when I'm reading so that I can read all the imagery and kind of set up a scene inside my head. And that just makes reading so much more vibrant. So that's something I'm working on. I also realized that when I'm reading books, I will read a book and then just forget about it. So I'm hoping to make more videos about books in the future on my channel. One, for myself, in order to kind of remember the books I'm reading. And also just because I really like reading books. I hope doing this will get me to read even more books. So if you like hearing me talk about the books I've been reading lately, please subscribe, give this video a like, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!